It all began on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the kind of birthday that starts out ordinary and ends with something that changes everything. Max had no idea, as he stood in front of the hallway mirror, carefully brushing his thick golden brown hair, that by the end of the day his life would be turned upside down in the most impossible way imaginable. Max was 12 years old that day, and he had exactly two things on his mind before his party guests arrived. First, making sure his hair looked perfect. It was his best feature, thick and just a little bit wavy, and it had a very important job to do, which was covering his ears. His ears stuck out quite a lot, and that was a fact he preferred the world not notice. The second thing on his mind was his younger brother, Lefty. Lefty, whose real name was Noah, was the only left-handed person in the family, full of restless energy that never seemed to switch off. He was always tossing a ball, drumming on something, wrestling someone, or finding the most inconvenient moment possible to cause trouble. And sure enough, right there in the hallway, Lefty was tossing his softball around in the house, which he absolutely was not supposed to be doing. He told Max his hair was messed up in the back, which was a lie, and then shouted, "Think fast," and hurled the softball straight at him. Max missed it completely. The ball hit the wall just below the mirror with a loud thud, and both brothers froze, waiting to see if their mother had heard. She had not. She was in the kitchen doing something to the birthday cake, and neither boy said a word about the incident again. The doorbell rang shortly after, and the party began to fill up. First came Zach, Max's best friend, already soaked from the rain, handing over a gift wrapped in silver paper with raindrops dripping off it. "A bunch of comic books," Zach explained cheerfully, adding that he had already read them. Zach had a serious face and intense little blue eyes that always looked like they were focused on something far away. He was the kind of person who had to win at everything, and when he lost, he kicked the furniture. He shook the rain off his Red Sox cap and asked immediately whether any girls were coming. Then came Erin and April. Erin had a high, squeaky voice that had earned her the nickname Mouse among some of the kids, and short, straight blonde hair. Max privately thought she was cute, though he would never in a million years admit that out loud. April had curly black hair and dark, sad-looking eyes. She was not actually sad, Max had figured out. She was just shy. April handed him a present wrapped in Christmas paper, the only wrapping paper her family had, and Lefty promptly stole it and ran off to start a pile behind the couch. Whitey, the family dog, a small black mutt who had been named Whitey for the obvious reason that he was completely black, spent most of the afternoon barking frantically at the living room window at something no one else could see. Max eventually grabbed him with both hands and dragged him away from the glass. By 2:30, 15 kids had packed into the house. The volleyball net in the backyard was useless in the storm, and a small war broke out over what to do. Max wanted to watch the Terminator movie he had rented. The girls wanted to play Twister. It was his birthday, Max pointed out. They played Twister. After that, they watched part of the Terminator video until it was time to eat. And it was a pretty good party, all things considered, even if Lefty ate his chocolate birthday cake with his bare hands, because he thought it was hilarious, and then opened his mouth wide to show. Everyone that chewed up results. By 5 o'clock, the sky outside was dark as midnight, the storm still hammering away, and the guests had gone home one by one. The only ones left were Erin and April, whose ride was running late. Max suggested they head upstairs to try out his new Super Nintendo game, and the girls followed him up gladly, since neither of them had much interest in the Terminator anyway. The upstairs hallway was completely dark. Max reached for the light switch and clicked it. Nothing happened. The bulb had burned out, leaving them standing in a thick, heavy blackness with Max's room all the way at the far end. They moved slowly through the dark. "That's kind of spooky up here," April said quietly, and the moment those words left her mouth, the linen closet door burst open, and with a howl that tore through the silence, a dark figure came leaping out at them. The trouble, as Max would later insist, started with the dog. But before Whitey sniffed his way into history, there was the matter of Lefty, crouched and waiting in the dark of a linen closet, ready to terrify everyone within screaming distance. And scream they did. The girls cried out in horror as the howling creature burst from the closet and tackled Max around the waist, wrestling him straight to the floor. It was Lefty, of course, Max's kid brother, laughing like a lunatic, absolutely convinced he was the funniest person alive. "Gotcha," Lefty crowed. "I gotcha. Good." Erin insisted they had known it was him all along. Lefty pointed out with perfect logic that if that were true, she might want to explain the screaming. Erin had no answer for that. Max shoved his brother off, climbed to his feet, and told him flatly that the whole stunt was dumb. Lefty accepted this review cheerfully. He started to get up, but Whitey, the family dog, charged over and began furiously licking his face. The tickling was so overwhelming that Lefty collapsed onto his back all over again, laughing helplessly. It was April who first noticed the door across the hall. Actually, it was Whitey, pressing his nose against it with curious intensity. Erin asked where it led, and when Max told her it was the attic, her face lit up like she had just been offered something wonderful. Max squinted at her in the dark. He could not imagine why anyone would love attics, but Erin was already asking if they could go up. And Max, with the mild indifference of someone who has grown up around old junk, said sure. It was not too big a thrill or anything. April, quieter and more cautious, pointed out that Erin's mom would be arriving any minute. She sounded less than eager, and if anyone was paying close attention, she sounded a little scared. Max opened the door and clicked on the light. A pale yellow glow fell down the steep wooden stairs, and one by one they climbed up, the old steps creaking under their weight. Max's shadow stretched long against the wall. Halfway up, the air turned hot and dry. At the top, the attic opened into one long, low room. Old furniture, cardboard cartons, stacks of yellowed magazines, fishing rods, piles of clothes, all the gathered debris of his grandparents' lives, spread out in every direction. The rain hammered against the roof above them, loud and constant, like they were standing inside a waterfall. Erin walked right in and took a long, satisfied breath of the musty air. She declared she loved that smell. Max told her she was definitely weird. They spread out and explored. Lefty tossed his softball up against the rafters and caught it on the way down over and over. April stayed close to Erin, her eyes moving carefully around the room. Whitey sniffed along the walls with urgent focus. Then Lefty, with that particular devilish grin of his, wondered aloud whether there might be mice up there. Big fat mice, he added helpfully, who liked to climb up girls' legs. April's eyes went wide. She announced she was heading back to the stairs. But Erin had already found a stack of old magazines and was flipping through one, laughing at the fashions. And then Lefty spotted something that stopped the whole room. Behind a tall stack of cartons in the far corner, Whitey's tail was wagging steadily, and the scratching, frantic, determined scratching, like the dog had found something that needed to be investigated at all costs. Max called him back. Whitey ignored him completely. Max made his way across the cluttered room, stepping around an old dining table, and found the dog scratching hard at the bottom of a door that had no business being there, a door nobody had known about. He called to the others. Erin rushed over immediately. Even April and Lefty came. Max admitted he had never known it was there. Erin said they had to see what was on the other side, and the excitement in her voice was the kind that does not wait for permission. And that was the moment, Max would later say, that everything changed. If Whitey had not been sniffing along that wall, if he had not scratched at that particular door, they never would have found the hidden room, and they never would have stumbled into the secret that waited, silent and undisturbed, just beyond that wooden door. Whitey started it all. One moment the dog was scratching and sniffing desperately at a low warped door tucked into the corner of the attic, and the next moment he had completely lost interest, trotting off to investigate some other corner, as if nothing had happened at all. That is the thing about dogs. Their attention moves like water, but the door stayed there. Waiting outside, the spring storm was hammering the roof above their heads. Rain came down in sheets, and the wind curled and whistled around the edges of the old house. Max reached for the rusted latch halfway up the door. It slid free without much effort, and the warped wood swung open on its own, pulled by its own weight. The hinges let out a long, slow squeak, and beyond them was nothing but solid darkness. Before Max had even pulled the door halfway open, Lefty ducked under his arm and shot into the black room ahead of everyone else. A dead body, Lefty shrieked from somewhere in the dark. April and Erin both cried out high and sharp, their terror completely genuine for one breathless second. But Max knew Lefty. He knew the dumb sense of humor like he knew his own reflection. "Nice try, Lefty," he said, and stepped through the doorway himself. Inside, Max found a small, windowless room. The only light drifted in from the pale yellow bulb hanging in the center of the attic behind them, barely enough to make out shapes. He told Erin to push the door all the way open and prop it, which she did, sliding a carton against it to hold it in place. Then she and April crept in to join the boys. "It is too big to be a closet," Erin said, her voice tight and a little too high. "So what is it?" "Just a room, I guess," Max said, waiting for his eyes to adjust. He took another step forward, and something stepped toward him. Max screamed and jumped back hard. The dark figure jumped back at exactly the same moment. "It is a mirror, Dork," Lefty announced, and the laughter that followed was immediate and a little unhinged. All four of them laughed together, nervous and high-pitched, the kind of laughter that comes from fear, suddenly released into relief. As the laughter settled, Max could see it clearly now in the pale light filtering through the doorway. It was a big, rectangular mirror, standing about 2 feet taller than him, set in a dark wood frame and resting on a wooden base. He moved closer, and his reflection moved to meet him. What surprised him most was how clean the glass was. No dust, no haze, despite the fact that no one had set foot in this room for what felt like a very long time. He stepped in front of it and reached into his jeans pocket for his comb, because that is what mirrors are for, after all. Who would put a mirror in a room all by itself? Erin asked. Her reflection hovered a few feet behind his in the glass. "Maybe it is a valuable piece of furniture," Max said, dragging the comb through his hair. "An antique?" Erin asked if his parents had put it there. Max said he did not know. Maybe it had belonged to his grandparents. He just did not know. April was still standing reluctantly in the doorway. "Can we go now? This isn't too thrilling." Lefty was already pressing his face close to the glass, making ridiculous expressions at his own reflection, suggesting it might be a carnival fun-house mirror that stretched your body into the shape of an egg. "You are already shaped like an egg," Max shot back. "At least your head is. You are a rotten egg," Lefty snapped. "You stink." Max urged April to step inside because she was blocking most of the light coming in. Reluctantly, complaining, she moved a few small steps into the room, and that was when Max spotted something at the top of the mirror, a light, oval-shaped, made of brass or something like it, holding a long, narrow bulb. He gazed up at it, trying to make sense of it in the dimness. "There is a chain," Erin said, stepping up beside him. Sure enough, a slender chain hung down about a foot from the right side of the lamp. Max studied it with genuine curiosity. "Wonder if it works," he said. "The bulb's probably dead," Lefty offered. Good old Lefty, always the optimist. "Only one way to find out," Max said. "Be careful," April warned from behind them. Max almost laughed at that. Be careful of what? A light. He stood on his tiptoes, stretched his arm upward, missed the chain on his first try, and grabbed it on the second. He pulled. The light came on with a startlingly bright flash that made all of them flinch. Then it dimmed down to something steady, very white light, clean and sharp, bouncing brilliantly off the mirror and filling the small room. "Hey, that is better," Max said, genuinely pleased. "Pretty bright, huh?" Silence. I said, "Pretty bright, huh?" Still nothing. He turned around. All three of his friends were staring at him with expressions of absolute horror. Their eyes were wide. Their faces had gone pale. "Max!" Lefty cried, his eyes practically pushing out of his skull. "Max, where are you? Max, where did he go?" Erin said, spinning toward April, her voice cracking with panic. "I am right here," Max told them. He had not moved an inch. He was standing exactly where he had been standing. "I haven't moved." "But we can't see you," April cried. And in that moment, the playful energy of the adventure drained away entirely, replaced by something colder and much harder to explain. Max was standing right in front of them. He could see them perfectly. But somehow, impossibly, they could not see him at all. Max stood there, convinced he was the target of a prank, staring back at three wide-eyed faces, twisted with what looked like fake horror. He had seen this kind of act before. He was not buying it. "Give me a break, guys," he said flatly. "I am not as stupid as I look. No way I am falling for your dumb joke." But Lefty and Erin held their ground, insisting they were serious. They really could not see him. Max rolled his eyes, wrote it off as dumb. And that was that. Except then the light began to hurt his eyes. It grew brighter, sharper, shining right into his face, until he had to shield himself with one hand and reach up with the other to pull the chain. The light clicked off, but the white glare burned on in his vision, floating in bright spots, no matter how many times he blinked. And then Lefty grabbed his arm, not in the way someone grabs a friend as a joke. He grabbed Max and squeezed, like a man checking to make sure something is real, like a person who had just watched someone vanish and come back and needed proof. They were truly standing there in the flesh. Max snapped at him, still annoyed, still certain the whole thing was a performance. But Lefty would not let go, and Erin spoke in a low, steady voice that did not sound like teasing at all. She had been standing right next to Max, she said, and she could not see him, not even a little. April, pressed against the wall near the doorway, offered a quieter explanation. "Maybe it was just the light from the mirror," she reasoned. "Some kind of optical illusion." Her voice carried the gentle desperation of someone who very badly wants a normal answer. Erin rejected it. What she had seen was not a trick of light. Max had been invisible. Lefty said the word out loud solemnly, the way you say something when you want to make absolutely sure the other person understands the weight of it. Max laughed. He told them they were doing a pretty good job of scaring him, but even as the laugh left his mouth, something had begun to shift. He stepped up to the mirror and pointed at his own reflection, smoothing down a strand of hair that had popped up at the back of his head. There he was, plain as anything, solid and visible. April begged them all to leave. Lefty tossed his softball into the air, watching himself in the mirror. Erin moved around to the back of the mirror, said it was too dark to see anything, and came back around to the front, staring up at the oval lamp perched on top. She laid it out carefully. Max had disappeared the moment he pulled that chain, and for the first time Max believed them. He could see it in the way they stood, in the way Lefty had gripped his arm, in the seriousness underneath Erin's voice. They were not joking. Something had actually happened when that light came on. So Max did what any kid who is half terrified and half fascinated would do. He told them to prove it. April practically groaned from the doorway. Erin asked what he meant. He meant exactly what it sounded like. Someone else should try it. Go invisible just like he had. Lefty's mouth dropped open and he lunged for the mirror immediately. Max grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him back. Not him. He was too young. Lefty struggled and Max held on, and then he turned to Erin. She shrugged and said she would try it. And something about the casual bravery of that answer made the moment feel more real and more dangerous all at once. They all watched as Erin stepped up in front of the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her, dark and shadowy in the dim room. She rose onto her tiptoes, reached up and closed her fingers around the lamp chain. She glanced over at Max with a small smile. "Here goes," she said. The chain slipped from Erin's hand, and just like that, the moment was gone. Before she could reach up and grab it again, a woman's voice floated up from downstairs. It was Erin's mom, calling for both girls to hurry down. They were late. Just like that, the spell was broken. April practically sprinted for the stairway, relieved to be leaving. The rest of them clattered down the creaking wooden steps, stumbling back into the ordinary world of the living room below. The mums exchanged that particular kind of bewildered glance that adults share when children say something that makes no sense at all. Playing with a mirror in a dusty attic, Erin's mum pulled her daughter toward the door before anyone could explain further. Max stood at the screen door and watched them step around the rain puddles on the walk. And then they were gone. The party was over. What came next had nothing to do with mirrors or attics or strange flashes of light. Lefty, being Lefty, started tossing his softball up toward the ceiling, right there in the living room, trying to catch it behind his back. He missed. The ball bounced hard off the floor, clipped an end table, and sent a large vase of tulips shattering to the ground. Water soaked into the carpet. Tulips went flying everywhere. Their mum did that thing she always does when she is truly pushed out of shape. She tossed her hands up and said something silent to the sky. Then she turned on Lefty and let him have it, really loud, the way she only did when she meant it. Lefty shrank himself into a corner and kept saying he was sorry, but the apologies were swallowed up by the noise. A few minutes after the mess was cleaned up, Max spotted his brother tossing that softball in the living room again. That was the thing about Lefty. He never learned. For a couple of days, Max pushed the whole mirror business to the back of his mind. School filled up the hours. Chorus rehearsals for the spring concert came and went. He saw Erin and April in the hallways plenty of times, and not one of them brought it up. It was as if they had all quietly agreed, without saying so, to leave it alone. Maybe they had simply shut it out, because if you stopped and really thought about what had happened up there, it was kind of scary. Then Wednesday night arrived, and Max could not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows sway. He tried counting sheep. He tried squeezing his eyes shut and counting backwards from 1,000. Nothing worked. His mind was too busy, too restless, buzzing with something he could not quite name. And then, without meaning to, he found himself thinking about the mirror. What was it doing up in that attic? Why had it been shut away in that tiny hidden room with the door carefully latched? Who did it belong to? His grandparents? If so, why would they hide it? Did his parents even know it was up there? The memories came flooding back. Standing in front of the glass, combing his hair, reaching for the chain, the bright flash of the lamp coming on, and then, had he seen his own reflection after the light went on? He searched his memory and found nothing there, just a blank. It was a joke, he said out loud, kicking his covers off. It had to be Lefty pulling one of his pranks, trying to make Max look foolish in front of his friends. Lefty had always been that way. He was never serious, not ever. So why was Max lying here in the dark, treating this like it was real? Before he had even fully decided to do it, Max was out of bed. He found his slippers in the dark. He buttoned up his pajama shirt. Then he crept out into the hallway as quietly as he could manage. The house was dark, except for the tiny night light near the floor outside Lefty's room. Max usually teased his brother about needing that light, but tonight he was grateful for it. He made his way on tiptoe toward the attic stairs, wincing every time a floorboard squeaked beneath him. Old houses like this one made noise no matter what you did. He stopped, held his breath, and listened. Silence. He opened the attic door, fumbled for the light switch, and clicked it on. Then he climbed the steep stairs slowly, leaning hard on the banister, trying with every step not to make the wood creak. It seemed to take forever. At the top he paused and let his eyes adjust to the yellow glow of the ceiling light. The attic was hot and stuffy. The dry air made his nose burn. A sudden urge to turn around and go back washed over him. But then his eyes found the doorway to the small hidden room. In their rush to leave on Saturday, they had left the door wide open. The darkness beyond it pulled at him like a magnet, steady and impossible to resist. He crossed the cluttered floor, stepped through the doorway without hesitating, and walked straight up to the mirror. For a moment he just stood there, studying his shadowy reflection in the glass. His hair was completely messed up. He took a step back to get a fuller view. The mirror showed him from head to toe, and there was nothing strange about it, nothing distorted, nothing wrong. That ordinary reflection helped calm him down, though he only realized then how frightened he had been. His heart had been fluttering. His hands and feet felt like ice. "Chill out, Max," he whispered, and watched himself whisper it back. He did a goofy little dance for his own amusement, waving his arms over his head and shaking his whole body. Nothing about this mirror was special. He reached out and touched the glass. It felt cool despite the warmth of the room. He ran his hand along the frame, smooth and cool beneath his fingers. Just an old mirror, he told himself. Something forgotten up here long ago. He walked around to the back to have a look. Too dark to see much. Nothing interesting. Well, he thought, he might as well turn on the lamp at the top while he was here. He came back around to the front, stood just a few inches from the glass, and began reaching up for the chain. That was when something stopped him cold. Down low in the mirror, two eyes stared back at him. Not his eyes. They were too low, too still, and they were looking right at him. Max cried out as the shock of it hit him. The question of whose eyes they were hanging in the hot, dark air of that little hidden room. Her breath caught in her throat as she peered down into the dark reflection of the mirror. Two eyes stared back at her, dark, evil eyes. She let out a cry of panic and spun away from the glass, calling out for Lefty in a voice that came out shrill and tight, as if someone were squeezing her throat. And there he was, grinning at her from just inside the doorway. It had been Lefty's eyes in the mirror all along. She ran at him and grabbed him by the shoulders, half screaming and half whispering that he had scared her to death. His grin only grew wider. He told her she was stupid and she wanted to strangle him. He thought the whole thing was a riot. She demanded to know why he had sneaked up behind her, shoving him back against the wall. He shrugged it off, explaining that he had been awake and had heard her walk past his room. So he followed her. She snapped at him that he should not be up here. He snapped right back that neither should she. She ordered him to go back downstairs and go to bed, trying to sound as if she meant business. But Lefty did not move. He told her to make him, which was another classic argument winner. When she insisted, he turned nasty and threatened to tell their mom and dad she was up there. She hated being threatened, and he knew it. That was exactly why he threatened her every hour of the day. Part of her just wanted to pound him, but they lived in a non-violent family. That was what their mom and dad always said whenever the two of them got into a fight. "Break it up, you two. We live in a non-violent family." Sometimes non-violence could be real frustrating, and this was one of those times. She could see that getting rid of Lefty was not going to be easy. He was determined to stay up in the attic and see what she was doing with the mirror. Her heart had finally slowed back to normal, and she was starting to feel calmer. So she stopped fighting and decided to let him stay. She turned back to the mirror, relieved to find that no dark eyes were staring out at her this time. Lefty stepped up behind her, arms crossed over his chest, asking if she was going to go invisible again. She turned and shoved him back a few steps, telling him to get out of her face because his breath smelled. That set off another stupid argument, and she was sorry she had ever come up here at all. She should have stayed in bed. Finally, after a great deal of back and forth, she persuaded him to stand a foot away from her, which felt like a major victory. Yawning, she turned back to the mirror. She was starting to feel sleepy. Maybe it was the heat of the attic. Maybe it was the exhaustion of arguing with her dopey brother. Or maybe it was simply because it was very late at night. She told him she was going to turn on the light and asked him to tell her if she went invisible again, but Lefty shoved his way right next to her, insisting he wanted to try it too. She refused. He pushed her. She pushed back. Then a better idea came to her. She suggested that they both stand in front of the mirror and she would pull the light chain at the same time. Lefty agreed. He stepped up practically nose to nose with his own reflection and stood at attention, looking ridiculous in those awful green pajamas. She stepped up beside him, reached her hand up, grabbed the light chain, and pulled. The light on top of the mirror flashed. Max cried out. The brightness was blinding, sharp enough to make his eyes sting. Then it dimmed, and as his vision adjusted, he turned to say something to his brother. Whatever the words were, they vanished clean out of his head the moment he realized Lefty was gone. "Oh, Lefty," he stammered. "I am right here," came the reply, calm and close. And yet Max could see absolutely nothing. No Lefty, no brother, just empty air where a person had been standing a moment before. And then it hit him. He could smell Lefty's sour breath, drifting nearby. Lefty was there. He simply could not be seen. Max was not visible either. The mirror confirmed it when he turned to look. The light poured down from the top of his frame, casting a bright glare over the glass. And staring into that glare, Max saw nothing at all. No reflection of himself. No reflection of Lefty. Just the wall behind them, and the open doorway leading deeper into the attic. So Erin and April and Lefty had been telling the truth that Saturday after his birthday party, he really had gone invisible, and now it was happening again, to both of them at once. Lefty's voice went small and shaky. "Hey, Max, this is weird." "Yeah," Max agreed. "It is weird, okay?" There was a moment of pure strangeness, and then Lefty grabbed Max by the arm. Max jumped, startled by the sensation of invisible fingers closing around him. He grabbed Lefty back and tickled his ribs, and Lefty burst out laughing despite himself. They still had their bodies, they just could not see them. Max danced away to escape the tickling that followed, and Lefty called out for him with a note of real fear creeping into his voice. "I can't find you," Lefty said shackily. "Come back over here." "Okay." Max teased him a little, backing toward the wall, making his brother promise to stop the tickling before he stepped forward again. Lefty swore he would stop. Of course, the moment Max was close enough, Lefty went right back to tickling him. The little liar. They wrestled around in the invisible dark, and there was something both hilarious and genuinely eerie about grappling with a person you could not see, grabbing at arms that were not visible, laughing at a face you could not find. Finally, Max pushed his brother away and let his mind wander somewhere bigger. He wondered if they could go downstairs while still invisible. He wondered if they could leave the house this way entirely. Lefty caught on quickly, suggesting they could spy on people, and for a brief, giddy moment, the whole thing felt like an adventure. Max even brought up that old movie their parents had watched, about the ghosts who kept appearing and disappearing, playing jokes on people and driving them wild. But Lefty went quiet at the word ghosts, and his voice came out trembling. "We're not ghosts," he said. Number. They were not, and saying it out loud did nothing to make Max feel better about the situation either. Something else was happening now. Max felt strange in a way that was harder to laugh off. He felt light, fluttery, like his edges were losing their shape, like he might drift upward and away if he stopped concentrating. Lefty said he did not feel right either, and the playfulness drained right out of the room. "How do we get back?" Lefty asked. Max remembered. Last time, all it had taken was pulling the chain and clicking the light off. Simple as that. He reached up and found the chain and told Lefty not to worry, that they would be back to normal in a second. He could hear his brother breathing hard in the darkness. He pulled the chain. The light went out, and neither of them came back. There are moments when the thrill of a secret curdles into something cold and terrifying, and for Max and Lefty, that moment had already arrived before the chapter even truly began. They were invisible, both of them standing in the dark little hidden room at the top of the attic. And no matter how hard Max reached for the light chain, the world refused to give them back. Lefty was whining and tugging at an arm he could not see, his voice climbing toward full panic. Max could feel his brother's fear, and he felt his own stomach heave in response. He told himself to hold it together, to be the calm one, even as chills ran endlessly down his spine. He would not let Lefty know how truly terrified he was. Then Max stretched once more for the chain, and just like that they snapped back into existence. Their reflections bloomed in the mirror as if they had never been gone. They shouted together, then collapsed onto the floor in giddy, breathless laughter, so relieved they could barely breathe. Max had to clamp his hand over Lefty's mouth and remind him that it was the middle of the night and their parents would not be amused. Once they calmed down, Lefty asked the serious question. Why had it taken so long to come back? Max thought it through and offered his best theory. The first time he had gone invisible, it had only been for a few seconds, and he had returned instantly. But tonight they had stayed invisible much longer, and it had taken longer to return. The longer you stayed, the longer it took. It was a reasonable guess. It was only a guess. Lefty wanted to tell their parents about the mirror. Max refused firmly and completely. If their parents found out, the mirror would be taken away. That was simply not going to happen, because Max already had plans for it. He wanted to use it one more time, just once more, to scare the life out of his best friend Zach. Saturday finally arrived, and so did Zach, with his outrageous new haircut buzzed, short on one side and hanging long on the other. Max's mother made them all sit through lunch first, soup and peanut butter sandwiches, while Max gulped his food down as fast as humanly possible, and kept exchanging eager glances with Lefty across the table. Every second spent eating was a second not spent watching Zach's face fall apart with shock. Max hustled everyone upstairs the moment he could, feeding his mother a quick lie about old magazines in the attic. She didn't quite believe him, but she let it go. Up in the sweltering attic, the three of them crowded into the dim little room. Zach looked at the mirror and was thoroughly unimpressed. He wanted to go outside, ride bikes, find friends at the playground. Max made him wait. He stretched the moment out deliberately, enjoying the rare and wonderful feeling of knowing something that Zach did not know. Zach was always the one who knew everything, who had done everything, who had a magic kit at home with over 1,000 tricks. But he did not have anything like this. Max stepped in front of the mirror, sang himself a little fanfare, and pulled the chain. Zach stumbled backwards, actually stumbled from pure shock. His eyes swept the room, finding nothing where Max had been standing. Max's voice came out of empty air and Zach jumped. Lefty laughed so hard he could barely stand. Max took the softball right out of Lefty's hand and tossed it at Zach, who was so stunned he let it bounce off his chest. Zach ran around behind the mirror, looking for a hiding spot. He got down on his hands and knees searching for a trapdoor. Max pulled his shirt up over his head and tickled his stomach, and Zach thrashed and yelled and went bright red. His voice climbed so high it could only be heard by dogs. Max carried a cardboard carton out of nowhere, letting it float in the air in front of a terrified Zach. Then finally he saw that his friend was on the genuine edge of losing it entirely. He agreed to come back, and that was when the familiar dread crept in. Max felt dizzy. The light was hurting his eyes. He felt the mirror pulling at him, tugging him toward it, holding him down with a strange and heavy gravity. He gathered all his strength and yanked the chain. The room went dark, but Max did not come back. He stood there in the darkness, staring at his blank spot in the mirror, and a swarm of terrible questions descended on him all at once. What made him think coming back was automatic? What if the mirror only worked twice, and the third time you went invisible, you simply stayed that way forever? What if this mirror had been locked in a hidden room, precisely because something was wrong with it. What if it trapped people in the invisible world and never let them go? Zack was calling for him, voice trembling. Seconds kept passing. Max touched the cool glass of the mirror with his invisible hand and waited and feared and waited. Then, like a held breath finally released, he was back. His reflection returned, and so did the wide grin spreading across his own face. He spun towards Zack and sang his triumphant fanfare. Zack stood there with his mouth in a perfect circle of wonder, breathing the word amazing. He had to try it himself. He absolutely had to. Max hesitated. The responsibility of it, the strangeness of it, made him uneasy. But before he could answer, a different and far colder feeling swept through him. Where was Lefty? The question hit them both at the same moment. Lefty had been standing right there, right in front of the mirror, laughing and bouncing his softball. Now there was no answer to his name, no sound, no sign of him anywhere in the little room, or behind the mirror, or out in the attic. Max and Zack called for him and were met with complete and absolute silence. Zack had gone pale. His voice was shrill and frightened when he said what they were both thinking. Lefty had been standing right there, right in that spot, and now he was gone. Max stared into the dark and shadowy mirror, and the truth of it settled in his stomach like a swallowed stone. Lefty was gone. Maybe Lefty went invisible too, Zack had suggested. But that hopeful theory collapsed fast, because an invisible Lefty would still be able to answer them. The narrator called out again and again, voice rising with panic, hands trembling, legs shaking so badly she dropped right to the floor. And then came the giggling. It drifted out from behind a curtain in the corner, soft at first, then impossible to ignore. She was on her feet in an instant. More giggling. She lunged toward the curtain just as Lefty popped up from behind it, absolutely delighted with himself, screaming, "Gotcha!" and collapsing against the cardboard in a fit of laughter. The revenge was swift and satisfying. She and Zack pounced on him together. She yanked his arm back until he yelped. Zack demolished his hair and went straight for his ribs. Lefty was screaming and laughing and squirming and crying all at once, rolling in the dust like a lunatic who had never been happier in his life. She punched his shoulder hard and told him never to do that again. He just laughed, so she shoved him and climbed to her feet. She and Zack stood over him, both red-faced and breathing hard, glaring down at the boy who had scared them half to death. Lefty grinned up at them from the dusty floor. Zack suggested they beat him up some more. She agreed immediately. Lefty was on his feet in a flash, out the door and across the attic before either of them could move. She chased him, tripped over a stack of old clothes, and went flying headfirst into the floor. The pain shot straight up through her body. By the time she pulled herself up, voices were already coming from the attic stairway. Erin's head appeared first. Then April's Lefty had retreated to the far window-sill, red-faced and sweaty and very pleased with himself. She brushed the dust off her jeans and smoothed her hair, trying to look like she had absolutely not just been rolling around on the floor. April picked up an old Life magazine from a yellowed stack and started flipping through it, but the pages crumbled at her touch. She put it down fast. The narrator made a joke about attics being made for old things, which Lefty greeted with loud theatrical sarcasm. Then Erin asked about the mirror, the one with the strange optical illusion from the week before, and just like that, the words came tumbling out before she could stop them. She had never been able to keep a secret, and she knew it, and it never seemed to matter. She told them plainly that it was not an optical illusion, that the mirror had strange powers, that it could really turn you invisible. April laughed the way people laugh when they want you to feel foolish. She compared the idea to flying to Mars in a flying saucer after dinner. The narrator muttered and turned to Erin instead, because Erin was still watching her face with serious eyes, working something out. Erin decided she was serious. That was enough for her. Lefty jumped off the windowsill and sprinted toward the little room. begging to be the one to try it this time. She told him no. Erin volunteered herself. Then she called out to Zack, who had been somewhere in the attic this whole time, asking if he thought they should let Erin try it. She stepped into the little room to find him. The mirror light was on and burning bright. Zack was gone. "Oh, no!" Those were the first words out of Max's mouth when she saw what was happening, and honestly, they were the only words that made any sense. Zack had gone invisible. Lefty was laughing about it, casually announcing the fact to Erin and April like it was the funniest thing in the world. And then, as if to prove the point, the softball rose right out of Lefty's hand and floated in midair. Lefty shouted and grabbed for it, but invisible Zack yanked it just out of reach. Erin and April stood frozen, eyes bulging, mouths hanging open, staring at the floating ball like their brains had stopped working entirely. Then came Zack's voice, booming and cheerful from somewhere in front of the mirror. He said hello to the girls. April screamed and grabbed Erin's arm. Max was not laughing. Max wanted answers. How long had Zack been invisible? About 5 minutes, he said. When she had chased after Lefty, Zack had pulled the light chain and gone invisible on his own. Then he heard voices and just stayed that way, thrilled with himself. Max felt her stomach tighten. 5 whole minutes. That was too long. She reached up and pulled the chain without another word, cutting the light and letting darkness flood the room, filling the mirror with grey shadows. But Zack did not come back. April's voice cracked with panic. It had not worked. Zack was still gone. Max told them it would just take a little while, though her own voice sounded steadier than she felt. April asked how long. Max admitted she did not really know. And then Zack spoke again, and his voice had changed completely. The excitement was gone. He said he could not see himself. He was standing right beside Max. She could feel his breath on her neck. He sounded frightened now, really frightened, and that fear was contagious. Max forced herself to stay calm. She told him not to get tense. She reminded him that staying invisible for so long would naturally make it take longer to come back. But Zack was not reassured. He remembered how quickly Max had returned when it happened to her. He said this felt different. He said it felt like he was never coming back. April moaned that it was too scary. Erin's voice trembled as she asked Zack how he felt. Weird, he told her, like he was never coming back. Max snapped at him not to say that, but Zack said it again quietly and sadly, like he had already accepted something terrible. Max told everyone to chill. She kept her voice steady. She kept repeating it like a prayer. Just chill. Be patient. Everybody just be patient. And so they stood together in the dark attic, staring at the spot where Zack should have been, then at the mirror, then back again, waiting, watching. The silence stretched on and on. Max had never been so frightened in her entire life, and the question hanging over all of them was the one nobody dared to say out loud. What if Zack never came back at all? Zack was back. That was the only thing that mattered in those first breathless seconds. One moment he had been a voice without a body, pleading and frightened, and then he shimmered back into view like a television picture finding its signal. He slumped to his knees on the floor, and everyone gathered around him with relief written all over their faces. But relief, it turned out, lasted about 30 seconds with Zack. As soon as he climbed shakily to his feet, he was already rewriting history. Gone was the boy who had been whining and begging Max to do something. In his place stood Mr. Confident, chest puffed out, grinning like he had just won a championship. He wanted to go invisible before school Monday, he said, so he could spy in the girls' locker room. Erin called him a pig. He shrugged it off like it was a compliment. Max watched this performance with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had genuinely wanted to know if Zack was okay. Zack had confessed, quietly, that near the end he had felt something strange. A pulling sensation, he said, like something was dragging him away from the room, away from all of them. He did not know where. Then the smile crept back onto his face, and the confession was forgotten. because the only thing Zack truly cared about was this. He had stayed invisible longer than anyone else, at least 5 minutes. He was the invisible champion, and he intended to defend that title with everything he had. April stood apart from all of it. She had walked to the back of the room and sat down against the wall with her arms folded over her knees. She said it plainly and without apology. They were messing around with something that was not a toy. They did not know what it really did to a person's body. Nobody listened, of course. Lefty was already begging for his turn. Erin was insisting she had not gone yet. Zack was clucking and flapping his arms at Max, daring him to be brave enough to beat the record. Max felt the flutter of nerves in his chest, that low anxious hum that told him something was not quite right. But then he caught the look on Erin's face, and he could not bear the thought of being the one who chickened out. So he did what any 12-year-old boy caught between fear and pride would do. He told Erin to go first. Erin stepped up to the dark mirror with genuine excitement. She pulled the chain, the light flared, and she vanished. Her voice remained, floating in the air above where her body used to be, and she sounded absolutely delighted. She wandered out into the attic and made an old coat rise up and dance. She flipped the pages of a dusty magazine. She tugged Lefty's hair until it stood straight up and laughed when he twisted away from hands he could not see. April sat against the wall watching her watch, calling out the time in a flat, reluctant voice. For 4 minutes, Erin was having the time of her life. Then something changed. Her voice lost its brightness and went soft and uncertain. She said she felt strange. She said she did not like it. She sounded far away, like a signal fading out. April was on her feet, instantly crossing the room, telling Max to bring her back right now. Max pulled the chain. The light clicked off, and then there was nothing to do but wait and hope. It took nearly 3 minutes for Erin to reappear. 3 very long, very quiet minutes. When she finally shimmered back into view, she shook herself all over, like a dog stepping out of a lake, and then she grinned to let everyone know she was fine. It was terrific, she said, except for those last few seconds. Zack informed her cheerfully that she had folded with only 15 seconds left to beat his record. Erin shoved him and told him to stop being a jerk. She would beat his record next time, she promised. Lefty announced he was going to stay invisible for a whole day, maybe 2. Max told him that might be dangerous. Then Zack turned to Max, and the teasing began all over again, and Max knew there was no escape from it. He could step up to that mirror, or he could spend the rest of his natural life being reminded by Lefty 20 or 30 times a day that he had backed down. So he made one condition. When he called out the word ready, Zack was to pull that chain as fast as he possibly could. Instantly, like that, Zack agreed. His expression, for once, was completely serious. Max turned to face the mirror. He stared at his own reflection. He had a bad feeling about this, a real, genuine, unmistakable bad feeling, the kind that lives in the stomach and does not go away just because you want it to. He reached up and pulled the chain anyway. When the glaring light finally dimmed, Max stared hard into the mirror. The reflections were bright and clear against the back wall. He could see April slumped on the floor, staring intently at her watch. Lefty stood near the wall to the right, gaping at the spot where Max had stood, a silly grin on his face. Zack stood next to him, arms crossed over his chest, also staring into the mirror. Erin leaned against the wall to the left, her eyes fixed on the light above the mirror frame. And where was Max, standing right in front of the mirror, right in the center of it, staring at their reflections, staring at the spot where his own reflection should have been. Only it wasn't there. He felt perfectly normal, but he had vanished from the world's sight entirely. Experimenting, he kicked the floor. His invisible sneakers made the usual scraping sound. He grabbed his left arm with his right hand and squeezed it. It felt perfectly normal. He said hello to everyone, and his voice came out, sounding exactly the same as ever. Only he was invisible. He glanced up at the light, casting a yellow rectangle down onto the mirror, and wondered about its power. Did it do something to your molecules? Make them break apart somehow so you couldn't be seen? No, that wasn't a good theory. If your molecules broke up, you would have to feel it, and you wouldn't be able to kick the floor, or squeeze your arm, or talk. So what did the light do? Did it cover you up somehow? Did it form some kind of blanket, a covering that hid you from yourself and everyone else? Max had the feeling he would never be able to figure it out, never know the answer. He turned his eyes away from the light. It was starting to hurt. He closed them, but the bright glare stayed with him, two white circles that refused to dim. Erin's voice broke into his thoughts. "How do you feel, Max?" "Okay, I guess," he said. His voice sounded weird to him, kind of far away. April called out that 4 minutes and 30 seconds had passed, and Max remarked that the time had gone so fast. At least, he thought he said it. He realized he couldn't tell if he was actually saying the words or just thinking them. Then the bright yellow light glowed even brighter. He had the sudden feeling that it was pouring over him, surrounding him, pulling him. He told them he felt weird. No response came. Could they even hear him? The light folded over him. He felt himself begin to float. It was a frightening feeling, as if he were losing control of his body. He screamed for Zack, telling him he was ready, begging him to respond. It seemed to take Zack hours to reply, and when he did, his voice sounded tiny, impossibly far away, like it was coming from miles and miles off in the distance. Waves of yellow light rolled over Max like ocean waves, sweeping him away, dragging him further and further from the world he knew. He understood that he would float away and keep floating forever unless Zack pulled that chain and brought him back. He screamed at Zack to pull it, pleading with him, desperate and terrified. He saw Zack step up to the mirror, blurred in shadows, moving through darkness on the other side of the light. So far away. Max felt feather light. He watched Zack jump up and grab the lamp chain, pulling it down hard. The light did not click off. It glowed even brighter. And then Zack's face filled with pure horror. He held up his hand, trying to show Max something. He still had the chain in his hand. "Max, the chain," he stammered. "It broke off. I can't turn off the light." And there was Max, invisible, weightless, being pulled further and further into the blinding yellow light, with no way back, and no one able to bring him home. Beyond the shimmering wall of yellow light, Zack's outstretched hand came clearly into view. The dark chain dangled from his fingers like a dead snake, and his voice was sharp with alarm as he cried out that it had broken off. Max hovered beside him, floating, fading, feeling himself being pulled somewhere he could not name, somewhere far away. April was screaming. Her words were impossible to make out. Lefty stood frozen in the center of the room, which was strange all on its own, because Lefty was never still. He was always moving, always bouncing, running, falling. But now even he stood staring at the broken chain, held in place by something he could not explain. The light shimmered brighter. Then Erin moved. She dragged a large cardboard box across the floor, the scraping sound of it seeming to come from somewhere impossibly distant. She pulled the box next to the mirror and climbed up onto it. Max watched her reach up toward the lamp, watched her stare into the burning light, and wanted desperately to ask her what she was doing. But he was already too far away. He was floating off, feeling as light as a feather, as the yellow light spread over him and covered him and pulled him further and further into nothing. And then, with startling suddenness, the light was gone. All was darkness. Erin proclaimed that she had done it, explaining breathlessly to the others that there had been a small piece of chain still attached up there, and she had pulled it and turned off the light. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for Max, asking if he was okay, and if he could hear her. He could. He told her he was okay. He stepped up to the mirror and searched for his reflection, feeling himself coming back, feeling stronger and more solid with every second. Lefty said that had been scary. Zack wanted to know the time. April sat against the wall looking pale and tight with worry, and she told him 5:48. Then she added quickly that she really believed this competition was a big mistake. Zack groaned and turned toward Max, declaring that he had beaten the record. Almost 6 minutes. He could not believe it. Lefty announced he was going for longer than that. Pushing past Zack and stepping up to the mirror, Erin told him they had to fix the chain first. It was too hard to keep climbing onto the box just to pull that tiny piece of chain. Max agreed that things had felt pretty strange near the end. The light had grown brighter and brighter. Erin asked if he'd felt like he was being pulled away, and when he said yes, like he was fading, she told him that was exactly how it had started to feel for her too. April shook her head and said again that this was just so dangerous. Then Max popped back. His knees buckled, and he nearly fell, but he grabbed the mirror and held himself up. After a few seconds his legs felt strong again, and he took a few steps and found his balance. April climbed to her feet and brushed the dust off the back of her jeans, demanding to know what would happen if they could not turn off the light. What if the chain completely broke and the light stayed on? What then? Max shrugged and said he did not know. Zack said it would not happen. He pulled a string from his pocket and climbed up onto the box, tying it tightly to the remaining piece of chain. "Pull the string, the light goes out," he told April. "No problem." But April was not the only one already moving past the danger. Erin asked which one of them would be first to go outside while invisible. Lefty grinned and said he wanted to sneak into school and terrorize Miss Hawkins, his social studies teacher, who had been terrorizing him since the school year started. He wanted to creep up behind her and say hello, and have her turn around to find absolutely no one there. Erin scoffed and told him he had no imagination. She painted a wild and glorious picture, the chalk flying out of Miss Hawkins's hand, the erasers sailing across the room, the wastebasket tipping everything onto her desk, her yogurt launching straight into her face. Lefty loved it. Max laughed at the image of the four of them slipping invisibly through the school, completely unseen, doing whatever they pleased. They could wreck the whole place in 10 minutes. Everyone would be screaming and running for the doors. But Lefty had more pressing business. He said they could not do any of that yet, because it was his turn to beat the record. He turned to April, who stood tensely by the door, pulling at a strand of her black hair, a worried frown carved into her face. He asked her if she was ready to time him. She sighed and said she supposed so. Lefty pushed Max aside, stepped in front of the mirror, stared hard at his own reflection, and reached for the string. The competition was not over. If anything, it was just beginning, and April's unanswered question still hung in the air like a warning no one wanted to hear. Trouble had a way of sneaking up on Max, and today it came wearing his little brother's invisible face. The afternoon secret experiment came to a screeching halt the moment their mother's voice cut through the house like a fire alarm. Grammy and Poppy had arrived. Dinner was on the table, and friends had to leave. Lefty groaned and whined about not getting his turn at the mirror, grabbing for the string one last time before Max shut him down with a firm warning. There was no room for arguments. The last thing either of them needed was their parents wandering upstairs and discovering what had been going on in that bedroom. Max herded everyone down the stairs, hissing at them to keep quiet, to talk about something else, to act normal. But his friends could barely contain themselves. Erin wanted to come back tomorrow. Zack was already campaigning for Wednesday, when there was no school, already dreaming about beating Max's invisibility record. Max told them maybe brushing off the pressure as best he could, because the truth was, even though the whole experience had been thrilling and electric, it had also left him rattled in a way he hadn't quite sorted out yet. He ushered them out the front door, closed it firmly behind him, and walked into the dining room to face his grandparents. Grammy and Poppy were already deep into their soup, as punctual and predictable as ever. They were a matched set, those two, with their long, thin faces and short white hair and thick silver framed glasses. They looked so alike, people might have mistaken them for brother and sister. Max gave them each a kiss on the cheek, Grammy smelling of oranges and feeling soft as old bread. Then he sat down and tried to be present, tried to act like a normal kid at a normal dinner table. It was hard. His mind was still buzzing with the afternoon. He wanted nothing more than to go lie on his bed, stare at the ceiling, and pull the whole experience apart piece by piece the way he always did after something remarkable happened. His father liked to say Max had a scientific mind. Right now that scientific mind was somewhere else entirely. His grandparents filled the air with their usual bickering, this time over soup, of all things. Was the soup they had somewhere cold or warm? Was it strawberry or yogurt? Was some other soup, tomato or potato leaf? The argument rolled on like a slow-moving cart, and Max found himself almost grateful for the distraction. Then his father looked up and asked where Lefty was. The chair next to Max sat empty. Max had been so absorbed in the soup debate that he had completely forgotten about his little brother. He called out toward the doorway, and his mother scolded him for shouting at the table. She told him to get up and go find him. Max started to rise from his chair, and then he saw it, Lefty's soup bowl lifted off the table on its own. Max's stomach dropped straight to the floor. He knew instantly what was happening. His idiot little brother had snuck back upstairs, used the mirror, and turned himself invisible. And now, thinking he was the funniest person alive, he was floating objects at the dinner table in front of their parents and grandparents. Max lunged across and yanked the bowl down hard, whispering sharply for Lefty to get out. His mother stared at him, confused by what she thought she heard. Max covered quickly, pretending he had said he was going to get up and find his brother. He started to move again, but Lefty wasn't finished. The water glass rose slowly into the air, hovering over the table like something out of a haunted house. Max grabbed for it desperately. He grabbed too hard. The glass jerked, and water cascaded across the table. His mother yelped. His father went very still, and then his father's eyes found Max's, and they stayed there burning and knowing. Max felt it wash over him then, that cold, heavy dread, not the exciting shiver of a secret shared among friends, but the sickening certainty that something precious and dangerous had just been exposed. His father had seen. He had seen everything, and whatever came next, Max knew with absolute certainty Lefty had just blown the whole thing wide open. There was a moment at the dinner table when everything could have unraveled completely. Max sat rigid, watching his father's face twist with anger, bracing for the worst possible question. But the question never came. Dad had not seen an invisible boy floating a soup bowl through the air. He had seen Max goofing around, pulling some kind of comedy stunt. The relief was almost dizzying. Max pushed away from the table, muttered an apology, and moved quickly through the living room, climbed the stairs and stopped at the attic door. He whispered into the empty hallway, hoping Lefty had followed him. And Lefty had. Of course Lefty had. He was right there, invisible and already giggling. That high-pitched giggle Max absolutely hated. Up in the little room with the mirror, Lefty crowed about his victory. He had stayed invisible for nearly 10 minutes. He had floated a soup bowl in front of the whole family at dinner, and as far as he was concerned, he was the undisputed champion. Max was furious, not pretend furious, not mildly irritated, but genuinely, deeply furious. He grabbed Lefty by the shoulders and made him promise never to go invisible alone again. Lefty agreed. He also had his fingers crossed on both hands. Later that night, around 11, Erin called. She was electric with excitement, talking so fast her voice turned into a blur. She had an idea, a big one. What if they brought the mirror to the school science fair? Max could go invisible in front of everyone. Erin could go invisible too. They would win first prize, a trophy and a gift certificate. They would be famous. Their pictures would be in magazines. Max listened carefully and felt something shift inside him, not excitement, more like a cold, quiet dread. Famous meant discovered, discovered meant taken away. Scientists would want the mirror. Government people would want it. The army might want to use it to make soldiers disappear on battlefields. Whatever the mirror was, magic or invention or something else entirely, it was not going to stay in the hands of a kid once the world found out about it. He told Erin they had to keep it a secret. She agreed, though not without some reluctance. She also told him that April wanted to try the mirror on Wednesday, and that she was planning to break whatever record currently existed. Max hung up and lay in the dark, unable to sleep. He rolled from side to side. He counted sheep. He stared at the ceiling. His heart was moving too fast, and his mind would not slow down. The mirror sat above him in that little room, and it was like a magnet he could feel through the floorboards. By nearly 3 in the morning, he gave up. He crept barefoot up the attic stairs, pressing hard on the banister to muffle the creaking wood, and stubbed his toe on a wooden crate hard enough to have to swallow a scream. When the pain finally faded, he dragged a carton in front of the mirror and sat down on it. He looked at himself in the glass. His hair was a disaster, but he did not care about that tonight. He was searching for something he could not name. He ran his palm across the cool surface and pulled it away. No handprint. He traced the smooth wooden frame, walked slowly around to the back, and found nothing unusual. He returned to the front and stared up at the lamp above the mirror. It looked ordinary. The bulb was long and thin, but it seemed like any other bulb. Nothing answered his question. He sat back down and rested his head in his hands. He should have gone to bed. His parents were waking the family early the next morning for a drive to Springfield. He knew all of this, and still he sat there, staring into his own reflection, until the shapes in the glass began to soften, to blur, to sink into deeper and deeper shadow. And then he heard it. It was barely a whisper, less than a whisper. It was a suggestion of a whisper, like wind brushing through leaves on a still night. His name stretched out long and low and sad. Mayax. He told himself it was inside his head. He held his breath and listened. Silence. He breathed out slowly, and then it came again, louder this time, carrying something almost like grief in it, like a voice calling from a place very far away and asking desperately to be heard. Max pressed his hands over his ears. Inside the mirror the dark shape shifted. He stared back at his own reflection, pale and wide-eyed and shaking with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. The whisper was coming from the mirror, from behind his reflection. From somewhere on the other side of the glass he ran. He did not think about it. He ran out of the little room, flew down the attic stairs, crossed the hall in bare feet, and threw himself into bed. He pulled his eyes shut and lay there in the dark, desperately hoping that whatever had called his name from inside the mirror had not followed him home. Max lay in his bed, covers pulled tight to his chin, his whole body trembling. The night had left something cold and unsettling behind, and he could not shake it. He was breathing hard, gripping the blanket with both hands, waiting and listening in the dark. The whispers from before still haunted him, that dry, desperate voice calling his name. Was it real, or was he losing his mind? Then came the panting, hot, sour breath on his face. Something grabbed at him, and he opened his eyes in pure terror, only to find Whitey, his ridiculous dog, standing on his hind paws and furiously licking his face. Max laughed out loud, relief washing over him like warm water. He hugged the dog and pulled him up onto the bed, grateful beyond words for the interruption. Whitey whimpered and wagged his tail like crazy, full of his own strange energy. "What has got you so worked up?" Max asked, hugging him close. "Do you hear voices too?" Whitey let out a low bark, as if answering, then hopped off the bed, turned 3 times in a tight circle, and settled himself on the carpet with a loud yawn. The dog curled into a ball and chewed softly on his tail. Accompanied by those gentle snores, Max eventually drifted into a restless sleep. When he woke, the morning sky outside was still grey. The curtains swayed in a strong breeze drifting through the cracked window. He sat up quickly, his mind sharp and already made up. He had to stop going up to the attic. He had to forget about the mirror. More than that, he had to get everyone else to stop too. The whispered cry from the night before was still with him, that sad voice speaking his name out of the dark. His mother's voice from the hallway cut through his thoughts. It was time to wake up. They were going to Springfield. He called back that he was already up, and he heard her footsteps fade down the stairs. He stretched, and then his closet door swung open. A red Gap t-shirt rose up off the shelf and began to float across the room, followed by a familiar fit of giggling. "Lefty, you are ridiculous!" Max shouted. He swiped at the floating shirt, but it danced out of his reach. Lefty had promised not to do this again, but of course he had his fingers crossed. A pair of jeans joined the performance, parading back and forth in front of Max like they owned the room. Max was furious. He lowered his voice, remembering his parents were downstairs, and ordered Lefty to put the jeans down, go upstairs, and turn off the mirror light immediately. This was not a game. Lefty needed to understand that. Then the jeans collapsed in a heap on the carpet. Max told him to toss them over and get moving. Silence answered him. The jeans did not move. Max felt a stab of dread settle into his stomach. He snapped at Lefty to stop fooling around. He called his name again, his voice beginning to shake. Nothing. He tried once more, admitting out loud that Lefty was scaring him, certain that was the moment Lefty would giggle and give himself away. But the room stayed perfectly still. The curtains fluttered softly. The jeans lay crumpled and unmoving on the carpet. No giggle, no answer, no Lefty. Lefty was gone. Max's voice came out weak and trembling as he called his brother's name. But Lefty wasn't there. It wasn't a game. He was simply gone. Without thinking, Max bolted out of his room, down the hall, and pounded up the steep wooden stairs to the attic, his bare feet slapping against each step. His heart was pounding even louder than his feet. The moment he stepped into the sweltering heat of the attic, a wave of fear crashed over him. What if Lefty had disappeared forever? With a frightened cry, Max lunged into the tiny room. The bright light from the bare bulb reflected in the mirror and blasted straight into his eyes. Shielding his face with one hand, he fumbled his way to the mirror and yanked the string. The light went out. He called out into the darkness, his voice cracking with panic. No reply came. He called again and again, until fear had clogged his throat so completely that he could barely speak. He was panting, chest heaving, teetering on the edge of something truly terrible. And then, from right beside him, his brother's voice broke through the dark. "Hi, Max, I'm here." Max was so flooded with relief that he turned and threw his arms around his invisible brother before he could even think about it. Lefty sounded genuinely startled by the emotion. He kept insisting he was okay, that everything was fine, but it still took a few minutes for him to fully reappear. Once he did, Max looked him over like someone who hadn't laid eyes on him in months. He demanded to know what had happened, where Lefty had gone, why he had simply vanished. Lefty shrugged it all off. He said he had just come up to the attic, that everything was fine, that Max needed to stop worrying, but something was off. Max couldn't put his finger on it exactly, but staring at his brother's face, he was certain that something was different, something was weird. Lefty grew irritated under the scrutiny and shoved Max away, already dancing toward the stairs, already waving off every question. Max followed him out, and in the sternest voice he could manage, he told his brother to stay away from the mirror. He meant it, no more getting invisible. Lefty snapped back an impatient "okay" and headed downstairs. Their mother was waiting in the hall, and the first thing she did was ask Lefty what he had done to his hair, whether he had brushed it differently or something. Lefty denied it. He said it was the same as always, that maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. She told him to stop being a smart mouth and get downstairs. So even their mother had noticed. Something had changed in Lefty. Neither of them could say exactly what it was. As Max grabbed his jeans off the floor and pulled them on, the fear that had gripped him began to loosen its hold. He had been so terrified, truly terrified, that something horrible had happened to his little brother, that the mirror had swallowed him up for good, all because getting invisible had felt like such a thrill. That thought brought Erin, April, and Zack to mind. They were buzzing with excitement about Wednesday and the big competition. Even April had agreed to go invisible this time. But right then and there, sitting on the edge of his bed to tie his sneakers, Max made up his mind. He was going to call all three of them when he got back from Springfield. He was going to tell them the competition was cancelled. No more mirror, no more disappearing acts, no more of any of it. The decision settled over him like a warm blanket. All that fear seemed to float right out of him, and for the first time in what felt like a long while, he felt light again, almost free. What Max did not know, as he tied the last knot in his laces, and felt so certain that the worst was behind him, was that the most frightening moment of all was still waiting just ahead. Imagine the shock on Max's face when Zack, Erin, and April showed up at his front door on that Wednesday morning. He had called the whole thing off. He had made that perfectly clear. And yet there they were, standing on his porch like nothing had changed. It turned out that Lefty had called them. Lefty, Max's little brother, had phoned each of them and told them Max had changed his mind. Max could barely believe it. Lefty was not even home at that moment. He was off at the playground playing softball without a care in the world, while the chaos he had set in motion was already unraveling right there in the front hallway. Max's mum appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel, looking just as bewildered as her son. She had been expecting Max to help her down in the basement, not to entertain a crowd of friends, but Zack, ever smooth, told her they had simply dropped by, and Erin offered to leave if Max was busy. Mum, however, waved it all off and said it was good they had come, since Max had already been complaining about how boring the basement chore would be. She disappeared back into the kitchen, and the moment she was gone, Max's three friends practically pounced on him. "Upstairs," they said. "Let's get invisible." April had never done it before, and she called first turn, her voice carrying the particular urgency of someone who might lose her nerve if she waited too long. Max tried to slow them down, but he was outnumbered and outvoted, and he knew it. He gave in with a reluctant sigh and started up the stairs. That was when Whitey scratched at the door, back from his morning walk with a few burrs stuck to his tail. Max chased the dog into the kitchen, wrestled the burrs free, and then hurried up to the attic where his friends were already moving fast. By the time Max reached the top, April was standing directly in front of the mirror, and Zack had his hand on the light string, ready to pull. April's face was pale with the fear she was trying very hard to hide. She told them she had to do it right away, before she lost her nerve. Max asked them to at least get the rules straight first, reminding them that the mirror was not a toy. Zack grinned and told him to save the lecture. He said Max was only nervous because he was going to lose the competition, which made Erin laugh. But April was not interested in any competition. She said it clearly and firmly. She just wanted to see what it felt like to be invisible for 1 minute. And then she wanted to come right back. Zack, of course, announced he was going for the world record. Erin said the same. Max confessed he had a really bad feeling about all of it. The hair on the back of his neck was standing up, and he stepped closer to the mirror to smooth it down. Zack had a new idea then. He suggested they all go invisible at the same time and sneak over to the playground to terrify Max's brother. Everyone laughed at that except April, who repeated quietly that she just wanted to try it for 1 minute. Max finally decided there was no point arguing any more. Zack and Erin were too wound up, too excited, too far gone into the thrill of it all. He told them to get it over with. April turned back to the mirror. Zack reached for the string. He asked if she was ready and told her he would count to 3. April asked him to bring her back the moment she said the word, and she made him promise. No jokes. Zack promised her seriously, and for once he seemed to mean it. Then Whitey wandered in. The dog came sniffing through the attic door, nose to the floor, tail straight out behind him, following some scent only he could detect. Max called out to him, asking what he was doing up there. Whitey paid no attention at all. Zack had already started counting. April was standing stiff and still, staring straight ahead into the glass, bracing herself. She asked one last time for Zack to bring her back when she was ready. He told her he would. Then he said 1, 2, 3, and pulled the string. The light flashed on, and Whitey, that dumb, lovable, burr-catching dog, stepped right up beside April at the exact wrong moment. Max screamed at him to stop, but it was already too late. With a yelp of pure surprise, the dog vanished right along with April into thin air. The attic had become a stage for something none of them fully understood, and Max was the only one who seemed to feel the danger humming beneath all the laughter. It had started with chaos. Erin screamed about the dog. April shrieked that she was invisible. Whitey whimpered in the corner, trembling and frightened. Max shouted at Zack to pull the string. April protested, and then the light went out. When it came back on, April reappeared with fury written all over her face, and Whitey stumbled into view, his legs so wobbly he could barely stand. For a moment the 4 friends dissolved into helpless laughter at the sight of the confused dog trying to find his footing. Then their mother's voice cut up from the stairwell like a cold draught, and the laughter died instantly. Max answered carefully, telling her they were just hanging out, crossing his fingers and hoping she would not climb the stairs to investigate. The answer was lame, and he knew it, but it was the best he could manage. Whitey, having pulled himself together, went clicking down the wooden stairs to find her, and the crisis passed. But April was not satisfied. She had barely gotten any time in the light, and she wanted another turn. Max pleaded with all of them to stop, to get out of that dusty attic and leave the mirror alone. He told them how unpredictable it was, how no one could ever know what might happen next. Erin told him that was exactly what made it fun. They argued for 10 minutes, and once again Max lost. The competition was on. Erin was going first, and the time to beat was 10 minutes. She stood in front of the mirror making faces at her own reflection, completely confident, telling them 10 minutes was too easy. April settled back against the wall with her watch ready. Zack stood with his arms folded across his chest, his eyes bright with excitement. Max stood apart from all of it, wrapped in a cold, heavy dread he could not explain and could not shake. Zack pulled the string. Erin vanished in a flash of light. The joking continued immediately. Zack told her she had never looked better. April teased her about her hair. Even April, who had been sulking moments before, was laughing now. Everyone was loose and easy. Everyone except Max. He asked Erin if she felt okay, and the words barely made it out of his throat. She said she was fine. He reminded her to say the word ready if anything felt strange, and she told him impatiently that she already knew. 1 minute passed. Then Zack's arms flew up, and he started slapping his own face, yelling at Erin to cut it out as she grabbed him invisibly and yanked him around. Erin laughed, delighted with herself. Zack pulled free, rubbing his red cheeks, scowling, but not truly angry. It was the kind of rough, reckless fun that the mirror made possible, and most of them loved it. Most of them. Max's shirt suddenly yanked up over his head. He spun away, protesting, and Erin laughed again. 2 minutes were called. Then Whitey appeared in the doorway once more, that same careful, uncertain posture, staring into the room without entering. Max did not want to take any chances. He grabbed the dog by the collar and guided him firmly back to the stairs, waiting until he finally understood he was supposed to go down. By the time Max returned, 4 minutes had passed, and Zack was pacing like a caged animal, desperate for his own turn. Standing there watching, Max's mind drifted to Lefty. He had called everyone and cancelled the competition himself. So why had Lefty called Zack, Erin, and April and told them it was back on? Max filed it away as just another one of Lefty's cruel practical jokes, one he would have to repay with something truly awful. But even that thought could not hold his attention for long. 8 minutes. April called it out and stretched. Zack taunted Erin, telling her she might as well quit because her record would not stand anyway. Max asked if she felt okay. Silence answered him. He called her name. Still nothing. He told her not to mess around, that it was not funny. Zack backed him up, demanding she respond. The silence held. Max glanced into the mirror and saw April's reflection staring back at him. Her face had gone white. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, fragile and terrified. Erin was gone. The trouble started the moment Erin went quiet. Max had been calling her name into the empty air of the little attic room, his voice cracking with a fear he could not quite hide, when a can of Coke came floating lazily through the doorway. Erin had slipped downstairs on her own, invisible and thirsty, without telling a soul. She laughed it off, tilting the can back, so they could all watch the dark liquid pour into her invisible mouth before disappearing entirely. Max did not find it funny. He was the only one taking any of this seriously, and that loneliness gnawed at him. April kept her eyes locked on her watch. Zack scolded Erin more gently than Max expected, and for once the two boys were on the same side. But Erin brushed it all away with a grin and kept going. 12 minutes passed, then April called out the time, and Zack asked if Erin wanted to come back. No answer. Max felt his throat tighten all over again. He walked to the string with a shaking hand and pulled it down, praying quietly that nothing had gone wrong. The light clicked off. After what felt like forever, Erin shimmered back into view. She turned from the mirror with her fists raised, declaring herself the new champion. But something was off. Max could see it plainly, even if he could not name it. She looked fine on the surface, no pale skin or sick expression. Yet something about her was different. Her smile, maybe, or the way she held herself. He stared and could not put his finger on it. He did not have long to wonder, because Zack was already demanding his turn. He wanted 15 minutes, he announced, and he was not interested in hearing any objections. Max pulled the string, and Zack vanished in a flash of bright light, crying out in a deep theatrical voice about the return of the Invisible Man. Then, before anyone could stop him, Zack's voice drifted toward the doorway with an idea. They heard his sneakers clomping across the attic floor and down the stairs. Max pleaded for him to stop, knowing exactly the kind of trouble Zack's ideas could bring. But there was no stopping him. The four of them ended up in the backyard. 3 of them crouched behind the hedge, while their invisible friend moved through the garden next door. Mr. Evander was out there as always, stooped over his tomatoes in the sun, big belly hanging under his shirt, red bald head gleaming. Max held his breath. Then 3 tomatoes rose silently from the ground. They hovered, they circled, and then they began to spin through the air in a wide looping juggle. Erin and April pressed their hands over their mouths, shaking with silent laughter. Max groaned inside, but could not stop watching. When Mr. Evander finally noticed the spinning tomatoes hanging in midair just in front of him, his face went as red as the fruit itself. He shouted for his wife Mary. She came running across the yard, breathless and frightened, just in time for Zack to drop every tomato to the ground. Mrs. Evander stared at 3 perfectly ordinary tomatoes lying in the dirt and turned a very sharp look on her husband. She asked how long he had been out in the sun. She reminded him she had told him to wear a cap. The moment she turned her back to leave, the tomatoes rose again. Mr. Evander hollered for Mary to look, and just as she spun around, the tomatoes fell once more. She grabbed her bewildered husband by the arm and pulled him firmly toward the house. He went quietly, still staring back at the tomatoes, scratching the back of his neck. Even Max had to admit it was pretty funny. They laughed about it all the way back up to the attic, and Zack proudly declared himself the world's first invisible juggler. Then, at 12 minutes into Zack's turn, the silence came again. They called his name, they called it again. Nothing. Max was already moving for the string when Erin grabbed his arm, arguing that Zack had asked for 15 minutes and would be furious if they pulled him back early. April sided with Max. The argument was short. Max pulled the string, the light clicked off, and a few minutes later Zack flickered back into view. He smiled. 13 minutes and 20 seconds, April told him. He was thrilled. But now Max was staring at Zack the same way he had stared at Erin, searching for whatever was wrong, and then he saw it, or thought he saw it. Zack's hair was buzzed short on the right and combed long to the left. Max could have sworn it had always been the other way around. Zack laughed it off, rolling his eyes, telling Max he had been staring in that mirror too long. Maybe he was right. Zack would know his own hair. Max wanted to call it a night. Zack could be the champion, he said. He really did not feel like going in, but Zack and Erin would not hear it. They pushed him toward the mirror, both of them urging him on, telling him he could beat 15 minutes easy. Max pulled back and said no, and meant it, and tried once more to step away. Then Zack reached up with his free hand and pulled the string himself. Max stared into the mirror, waiting for the glare to fade from his eyes. It was always such a shock, that first moment when your reflection disappeared. When you stared at the spot where you knew you were standing and realized you were looking right through yourself. Erin was in a strange mood. She mimicked Max, repeating his usual question back at him with a grin that sat lopsided on her face. Not quite right. Max snapped at her, and she just smiled wider, telling him she was giving him a taste of his own medicine. Something about that smile unsettled him, though he could not put his finger on why. Then Zack stepped up to the mirror and studied his own reflection. Max watched him, and that uneasy feeling crept back in. He had never seen Zack stand in quite that way, admiring himself in quite that position. Something was different. He knew it, but he pushed the feeling aside, telling himself it was just nerves, just stress twisting the way he saw the people around him. April called out 2 minutes. Erin asked if Max was just going to stand there, and Max said yes, he was. He had no grand plans. He would simply wait out the time. Zack, grinning at the empty space where he figured Max was standing, dared him to beat 13 minutes and 20 seconds. Max felt a flash of irritation at the smugness in Zack's voice, and made up his mind right then. He was going to stand there until he did exactly that. And so he did. Minutes passed. April counted them off, and Max leaned against the mirror frame and held his ground. He did well, right up until just past the 11-minute mark. Then, without warning, the light began to hurt his eyes. He closed them, but it made no difference. The light grew brighter and harsher, sweeping around him, surrounding him, folding over him like something alive. The dizziness came next. He felt himself grow lighter and lighter, as if his feet might simply lift off the floor. His voice sounded tiny and far away when he called out to his friends, telling them he had had enough. Cold panic gripped him. He shouted for Zack to bring him back. Zack's voice came from what felt like miles away, calm and steady, telling Max to hold on. Max strained to see him through the blinding yellow light. Zack was just a dark figure moving toward the mirror. Max watched him reach up for the string. Pull it, he urged silently. One tug and the light would go off. One tug and he would be safe. Zack grabbed the string, and then a new voice cut through the room, a surprised voice, a familiar one. "Hi, what is going on up here? What are you kids doing?" Zack's hand dropped. He stepped back without pulling the string. Max's mom had burst into the room, and in that single terrible moment, the one thing that could save Max was left undone. Max was trapped, and no one could hear him scream. He called out desperately, begging someone to pull the string and bring him back. But just beyond the mirror, life was carrying on without him. He could hear Zack telling his mum they were just hanging out, and he could hear her asking where Max was, marveling at the little hidden room, wondering aloud where the old mirror had come from. Her voice reached him as if it were travelling through deep water, distant and distorted, barely real. The room began to shimmer around him. The light flickered on and off like a dying flame, and Max gripped the mirror frame with everything he had, fighting the strange weightless pull that threatened to carry him away. He shouted again, he begged, but the people he loved most were nothing more than grey shadows wavering in the rolling light, and they could not hear a single word he said. He watched his mum approach the mirror, close enough to touch if the world had been working the way it was supposed to. She walked slowly around it, admiring it, completely unaware that her son was right there on the other side, reaching out to her with every ounce of strength he had left. Then the strength gave out. Max let go of the frame. He began to float. His feet lifted off the floor. The blinding glare swallowed everything below him, and the pull of the mirror grew stronger, more insistent, like a tide he could no longer fight. He pleaded one last time, calling to his mum, asking if she could hear him, asking if she could do anything at all. But the voices faded, the shadows blurred, and the mirror took him. He passed through the glass and into something that had no good name. Colors shimmered and rolled around him, like shapes seen through moving water. He floated silently, drifting away from his friends, away from his mum, away from the tiny attic room where everything had gone so terribly wrong. He called for help, but his voice was swallowed by the shifting light. He screamed to be brought back, but the sound barely reached his own ears. He drifted deeper and deeper still. The glimmering colors gave way to shapes of grey and black. It was cold here, cold as glass. And then, as he sank further into this impossible place, even the greys and blacks faded away. The world turned white, pure, shadowless, ivory white in every direction, as far as he could see. Max stopped calling out. He was too frightened, too stunned by the cold, silent vastness surrounding him to make a single sound. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. "Hello, Max," it said. He was not alone. A scream tore from Max's lips the moment the figure emerged from the cold, white world of the mirror. His brain felt paralyzed, his words swallowed by sheer terror. The figure moved quickly, silently, closing the distance between them until it stopped just inches away. And then Max saw what made his blood run cold. He was staring at himself. His own face, his own eyes, his own smile, but twisted into something eerie and hungry, as cold as the glass that surrounded them both. "Don't be afraid," the reflection said. "I am your reflection." But Max screamed his denial. His eyes studied him the way a dog stares at a meaty bone. The smile only grew wider as Max's fear poured out of him. "I've been waiting here for you," the reflection said, its gaze locked and unyielding. Max turned and ran. He had to get away, but he stopped cold when he saw what lay ahead of him. Dozens of faces, distorted and unhappy, hovered in the air like something out of a fun house mirror. They had enormous, drooping eyes and tiny mouths pulled tight with sadness. Their mouths moved rapidly, frantically, as if trying to warn him, as if screaming at him to run before it was too late. Max stared hard at those bobbing, twisted faces, and his heart nearly stopped. Two of them looked familiar. Could that be Erin? Could that be Zack? Their mouths worked furiously, their eyebrows rising up and down in desperate urgency. Max called out to them. He begged them to help him. But they could not hear him. Nobody could hear him. Then he felt himself yanked around. The reflection gripped his shoulders with a strength that left no room for struggle. Its face pressed close, its quiet voice cutting through the frozen stillness like icicles dragging across glass. "You are not leaving," it told him. Max fought against the grip. but it was no use. The reflection spoke with a calm certainty that was somehow more terrifying than any scream could be. It had been waiting, it said, ever since Max turned on the light. It told him that his friends had not resisted. They had given in easily. The switch had been made. And now it was Max's turn. Others, Max cried out. The reflection explained with chilling patience. Erin and Zack had not struggled. The switch was made. Now they were inside the mirror, and their reflections had stepped out into the world to take their places. Max's mind reeled as everything clicked into place. That was why Erin and Zack had seemed different to him. They were reversed. They were their own reflections living in his world. And that was why they had pushed him into the mirror, why they had forced him to disappear. They were not his friends anymore. They were cold, hollow echoes wearing his friends' faces. The reflection pulled Max close again and spoke softly. "I am your other side," it said, "your cold side. Don't be afraid. Your friends were not afraid." Max understood exactly what would happen if he did nothing. His reflection would step out of the mirror and into the attic, and Max would be trapped inside forever, joining those sad, bobbing faces, screaming at the glass for eternity with no one to hear him. He had to think. He needed time, so he stalled, firing questions at his double. Whose mirror was it? Who built it? The reflection only shrugged. "How should I know? I am only your reflection, remember." Max pressed on, but the reflection cut him off. It could see exactly what he was doing. There was no more time for questions. The moment had come. The switch was about to be made, and the reflection's eagerness was barely contained as it declared that Max was about to become the reflection. The chapter leaves Max pinned in place, staring into his own cold eyes with no plan and no escape, balanced on the razor's edge between the world he knows and a prison made of glass. Max ran. That was all he could do. Pure terror drove his legs forward through a world that barely existed, a cold and shimmering emptiness where there was no floor beneath his feet, no walls on either side, no air rushing against his face to prove he was moving at all. The sad, distorted faces floated before him, bobbing silently in the blank white light, and he squeezed his eyes shut and dodged away from them, unable to think, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but keep moving. He knew his reflection was right behind him. He could not hear it. It cast no shadow. But the knowledge was there, bone deep and certain, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever felt, because he understood, in the way you understand things in nightmares, that if that figure caught him, he would be lost, truly lost, swallowed up inside the cold glass forever, unable to see or hear or smell or touch a single real thing in the world. So he ran. He ran until the colors began to bleed back in, until the light bent itself into shapes, until shadows moved and shifted in front of him like a promise. Then he heard his reflection's voice, right at his heels, calling out, "Stop, Max, stop right there." But there was something new in that voice now, something that sounded almost like worry, and that worried sound was exactly the thing that kept Max's legs pumping. He burst out of the mirror. One moment he was inside that silent, frozen emptiness, and the next he exploded back into the tiny attic room in a rush of sound and color and hard, solid, beautiful reality. He stood there, panting, gasping, and then he stomped his foot down onto the floor just to feel it push back. Solid, real. His friends stood before him with startled expressions frozen on their faces. His mother, he realized, must have slipped back downstairs at some point. Zack's eyes lit up with excitement. "Did you make the switch?" he asked eagerly. At the same moment, Erin asked, "Are you one of us?" Before Max could answer either of them, another voice spoke, his own voice coming from just behind him. They all turned toward the mirror. There, inside the glass, his reflection pressed both hands flat against the surface, red-faced and furious, glaring out at all of them. He got away. The reflection said, "The switch wasn't made." April's voice cut through the room. "I don't understand. What is going on, guys?" But Zack and Erin did not even glance at her. They stepped forward quickly and seized Max by the arms, spinning him around with a roughness that left no room for argument. The switch wasn't made, the reflection said again from inside the glass. "No problem," Erin told it. Together she and Zack forced Max up to the mirror's surface. "You are going back in, Max," Zack said, his voice heated and hard. He reached up and grabbed the light cord, and there it was, the chapter's terrible, unanswered question, hanging in the air of that little attic room like a held breath. Would the light go out? Would Max be pushed back into that cold glass world? And if he was, would he ever find his way out again? The light flashed on, and in that terrible instant, Max faced the most frightening thing he had ever seen. His own reflection stared back at him from inside the mirror, pressing open palms against the glass, calm and cold and ready. Max had gone invisible, but his reflection was still there, solid and patient, already speaking to him, like a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. "I am waiting for you, Max," the reflection said. "In a few minutes you'll join me in here." Max shouted back that he was leaving, that he was going downstairs, but the reflection shook his head with a slow, cruel smile. Erin and Zack, still under the mirror's terrible influence, were positioned to stop him. The reflection spoke with the calm of someone who had already won, already celebrating his freedom before it was even seized. April, standing near the door and completely lost, kept demanding to know what was happening. Erin soothed her in that strange, hollow way that made everything worse. Max's mind raced with panic. What could he do? What was left? Then something clicked. April, she could still move. She could still get out. "April, get help," Max screamed at her. "Go downstairs, get help, hurry." April spun toward the sound of his voice, confused and frightened. Erin and Zack moved fast to block her path. It looked like it was over, and then the door swung open. Lefty appeared in the doorway, peering into the room. He saw the reflection and must have taken it for Max, because that was just the kind of thing Lefty did. He grinned, wound up, and shouted, "Think fast." He hurled his softball straight at the mirror. The ball hit with a crack that split the air open. The mirror shattered, and the reflection, Max's cold and cruel double, did not have a single second to react. He broke apart with the glass, collapsing into shards on the floor before he could take one more breath of freedom. "No!" The shriek came from Erin and Zack at the same moment. Their reflections, the dark versions that had been controlling them, lifted off the floor and were sucked screaming back into the broken mirror as if some tremendous force were pulling them through. The sound was awful. The sight was worse. The reflections flew into the shattered surface and seemed to crack into hundreds of pieces right along with it. Lefty gripped the doorframe with everything he had, pressing his body against it, fighting not to be dragged into the room by whatever hungry force was at work inside. And then it was over. Erin and Zack dropped to their knees on the floor, dazed and blinking, staring at the glittering pieces of glass all around them. The real Erin, the real Zack, back. "You are back," Max cried, and the joy in his voice was the pure, trembling relief of someone who had just watched a nightmare end. "It is really you." Zack climbed unsteadily to his feet and helped Erin up. They looked shaken, still trying to find their footing in a world that had just turned itself right side up again. Lefty stayed outside the doorway, shaking his head at all of it. "Max," he said, in a voice of perfect reasonableness, "you should have caught the ball. That was an easy catch." It didn't take long to begin stitching things back together. They explained everything to April and Lefty as best they could. April had to go home to babysit her little sister, so she left with her head still spinning. The real Erin and the real Zack helped Max sweep up every piece of broken glass from that horrible little room. When they were done, they closed the door and latched it tight, then carried cartons over and stacked them up to seal it off for good. They made a vow, quiet and serious, that they would never go in there again and never tell anyone what had happened. Then Erin and Zack went home. Later, Max and Lefty drifted out to the backyard together. The morning felt distant already, like something half remembered from a nightmare, but the shudder in Max's voice was real when he told Lefty how terrifying it had been, how impossible to describe. "Sounds pretty scary," Lefty said, tossing his softball from hand to hand. "But at least everything is okay now. Want to play a little catch?" Max said no at first. Then he changed his mind. Maybe it would help. Maybe the simple back and forth rhythm of a ball in the air would pull him the rest of the way back to normal. They trotted behind the garage, their usual spot, and got into an easy, comfortable game. For a few minutes it actually worked. The tension began to loosen. Things felt almost ordinary again until they didn't. About 5 minutes in, Max stopped cold. He stood frozen, staring. His eyes had to be playing tricks on him. They had to be. "Here comes my fastball," Lefty said, and he wound up and threw it hard. Max did not move. He could not move. The ball shot right past him, and he never even reached for it. He could only stand there with his mouth open, staring in pure, speechless horror. His brother was throwing right-handed.